يا فلسطين جينا بالإبا والبصلة قوة الله فينا بعد طه وعلى يا فلسطين جينا بالإبا والبصلة قوة الله فينا بعد طه وعلى إخوان القدس قادم يا جموع الضلالة قرب الوعد الآخر وانتصار الرسالة إخوان القدس قادم يا جموع الضلالة قرب الوعد الآخر وانتصار الرسالة يا قدس يا قدس جند الله جند الله قاتلون قاتلون يا قدس يا قدس جند الله جند الله قاتلون.
Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everybody. Pasta Jardula here. That was a little video we see that's been floating out there right now talking about and showing the Houthis out there. Things seem to be escalating when it comes to this war. We have talked about it on this show before. Fiorella should be along shortly. She's having a little problems technically, but she'll be back shortly, and she will be here. Hopefully everything's working good on the Rokfin, the Rumble, and the YouTube channels, all our channels involved. I see a lot of people are watching on Fiorella's Twitter today. That is awesome. Please do us a favor, like, share. You know all the things that you can do to help out the show. Like I said, Fiorella will be along shortly having technical difficulties. But let's just jump right into the news of the day. This video that we played right over here showed the Houthis in Yemen, who had been under a brutal attack, blockade, sanctions, the whole 9 yards from the Saudi Arabian government, who once said that their government, the Houthis government, was the illegitimate government, and they were backing other factions in Saudi Arabia. But the Houthis, from what I've talked to people in this region, it was almost like Fight Club. Rule number one, nobody messes with the Houthis. Rule number two, nobody messes with the Houthis. And the Houthis have stepped up in support of the Palestinian movement. And today, to talk about this, we went to the big leagues, ladies and gentlemen. We went to antiwar.com, and we're bringing him on in. Mr. Dave DeCamp is with us. Dave, how you doing? I was able to meet this guy at the Rage Against the War Machine event, and I don't know what to say, brother. I love your work. I love your outlet. Thank you for joining the Convo Couch today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thanks for having me on.
No doubt. So let's just jump right into this because it's a little crazy. Let's bring up Fiorella's tweet real quick. I wanted her to be here for this, but she'll be jumping on soon. It says the U.S. legit names their operations the exact opposite of what they actually are. It's like we're having some sort of post-apocalyptic Hollywood movie produced by the Obamas, Clinton, Bushes, and McCains and directed by Klaus Schwab. And you got our man over there, Mr. Lloyd Austin, there in the flesh. What's your initial thoughts about what's going on? We'll jump into your article. We have your article. We'll put that article up as you're talking. But give us your initial thoughts on what's happening over here. This seems like this could be very dangerous and spiral right out of control. We've said this about the situation, that it's not just Israel and Palestine. The whole Arab world can be brought into this. The United States can be brought into this. Other superpowers like China and Russia can be brought into this. Your thoughts, Mr. Dave DeCamp?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the Houthis have shown that they can really disrupt things if they want. And so they got really good missile and drone technology over the years of fighting the Saudis and the U.S. So basically, since 2015, the U.S. backed the Saudi, UAE, and some other Gulf countries were involved in this coalition against the Houthis in Yemen. And in that time, the Houthis got really good at bombing the Saudi oil fields, hitting them with missiles and drones. And that is part of the reason why the Saudis decided to sue for peace with the Houthis, and they entered peace talks last year. And there's been a ceasefire. It's been kind of a shaky ceasefire since April 2022, but there's been no Saudi airstrikes in Yemen, and there's been no Houthi attacks inside Saudi Arabia. So it's held pretty well. And apparently they've also reached a peace deal that they're going to try to implement soon. But now we see with the Houthis, attacking these ships for Gaza, they're making it very clear that that's what this is all about. And they have said repeatedly the only way to restore calm to the region is for a ceasefire in Gaza, lift the siege on Gaza. But of course, instead of pushing Israel to do that or just cutting Israel off, which would force them to probably end what they're doing in Gaza, the U.S. has formed this big naval coalition now, although it does not really include any regional countries. The only Arab country that joined this coalition is Bahrain, which is a very small country. They're not on the Red Sea. Notably absent is Saudi Arabia and the UAE because they're worried that, if they get involved in this, then the Houthis are going to start hitting them. And they fought
Can we
the Houthis.
talk about Saudi Arabia real quick, though? I just want
Yeah.
to pause you. And let's talk about Saudi Arabia. Let's bring us up both on big screen real quick so we can get this question out. Because the Saudis, from what I understand, they have somewhat been like kind of walking this tight line. When the whole situation started on October 7th after the Hamas Palestinian resistance coalition that nobody talks about, they try to just single out Hamas, but there was other resistance groups that were part of that attack on Israel. Ever since that happened, it's been questionable where the Saudis were. The Saudis immediately cut off talks with Israel, said, okay, you know what? We're going to stop our talks with you guys. But from what I understand, they've also provided areas for the Israelis to launch missiles or use their country and whatnot. Where are the Saudis on this whole thing? Because like you just mentioned, Bahrain is the one who really joined. But the Saudis seem to be playing this game of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Obviously, we see what they're doing with the BRICS countries when it comes to China. And, but still, we understand, anybody who understands the history of Saudi Arabia understands that that's a monarchy that only exists because of the United States. So where are the Saudis in this whole thing, David?
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of in an awkward position because they are a big Arab country, a pretty big player in the region. But they are aligned with the U.S. and Israel ultimately. They were in these talks to normalize with Israel. And one of the big things that came out before the October 7th attack was that basically the Saudis always said their terms for normalization with Israel was a Palestinian state. And then it said that they dropped that condition, but they wanted them to at least give some concessions to the Palestinians. And then it came out that actually it doesn't matter. What they really want is a defense treaty from the U.S., kind of like a NATO-style guarantee. That's what the Saudis were really after. So they've suspended the talks with Israel, trying to kind of portray themselves, I think, as really against what Israel's doing in Gaza. But I think realistically, for their own interests, they want to stay aligned with the U.S. But at the same time, they kind of have to play it carefully. That's why they're not joining this coalition. So I think they're just hoping for this to end, really. But I don't know if they're going to really do anything to put pressure on Israel or anything.
Where is China in all this? From what I understand is that they're hanging out in the Red Sea just to observe, but they're not going to get involved. And obviously, if anybody's been paying attention to this situation as per what's going on in the UN, it seems like China and Russia are doing what they normally do, and they're working the room. They got Brazil to present a peace, one of the first peace ceasefires, what do you call them?
The resolution?
I don't want to say it's a bill. Yeah. Okay. So they got Brazil to do that, but they were working behind the scenes, and they seem to be pushing for a ceasefire. The Russia seems to say, let's honor the 1968 agreement. So where is China in this whole situation? Because people are very scared that things could escalate with China since we have so many China war hawks within our Congress.
I can't see China getting involved in this conflict. Like, I don't really see a route, even for like the China hawks, to turn this into a conflict against China. I think China, they're taking the neutral position, calling for peace talks, which is what we should really expect from them. And their one foreign military base is in Djibouti, and they have that there because of piracy in the region. But this is very different than piracy. Piracy, if it was, the Somali pirates rolling up on skiffs, trying to board a ship, there's very easy remedies for that. You can just have armed guards on your ship. But what
is it just about piracy? Hold on. Let me stop you there. Is it just about piracy? Because that seems to be strategically located in this area where there's always been a conflict, when a lot of people were saying that the reason why the United States is backing the Saudis is because of maritime trade going through those straits over there. It's very, very important. This is a strategic shipping area over here, right? So is it just about piracy? Is it more about this particular area. In fact, I know you can't see it on that map, but Socotra, which is located just south of Yemen, there's been talks about who really has control of Socotra. Are the Israelis controlling? Is it back in the hands of the Yemenis? So is this more about piracy when China has that base strategically located right there?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is because it's a strategic location. I guess there could be more to it than just trying to help prevent piracy in the region that they have a location there. But yeah, I still like when it comes to this issue with the Houthis, I just don't see China getting directly involved. It's just not in their interest. And so, especially when what the U.S. is trying to do in Asia right now, I mean, the buildup against China is still moving along pretty quickly. But for China's sake, I mean, the fact that the U.S. is still involved in Ukraine and now also putting all these resources into Gaza, I think just sitting back and watching is kind of goes to their benefit.
My mic, hold on a second. My mic keeps getting unplugged. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, you lost your mic?
It keeps going to my, I don't know why it's happening like that. It keeps going to my MacBook. Okay, so you can still hear me, though. Okay, what about Iran? Where does Iran stand in this whole situation? Because Iran has been known to be a close ally with the Houthis. In fact, a lot of the military gear, the drones and everything, Saudi Arabia like to blame Iran for that situation. Where does Iran stand in this whole conflict?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that's important to point out about the Houthis is that whenever you read an article about them in any sort of Western media, they're called, Iran-backed Houthi rebels. But the fact is they're not really rebels anymore. They've controlled Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, since 2014, and they control the territory of what used to be North Yemen when the countries were separated. They unified in 1990. And it's where most of Yemen's population lives. It's about 75% of the population lives in the area that's governed by the Houthis. And they are not this Iranian.
Did we lose him?
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
Did we lose you? You there? You're here.
I'm here now. You hear me? Sorry.
Yeah. Jamie, is the internet okay? Good. Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry. So you were talking about northern Yemen, and that's where the majority of the...
Yeah, I was basically just pointing out that the area that the Houthis control is where most Yemenis live. So it's not like they're just some little rebel group. They govern that area. And they're always accused of being an Iranian proxy. They're a very, homegrown movement. They're Zaidi Shia. Zaidi Shia imams ruled the area of Yemen that they control now for 1,000 years until 1962, when it became the state of North, kind of the modern state. So they're homegrown, and the Iran is, politically aligned with them. And it does seem like they've helped them develop this missile and drone technology. Now, it's not clear if Iran is actually shipping them missiles and drones because Yemen's been under blockade, a U.S.-Saudi blockade since 2015. But it does appear that they've helped kind of their engineers make these missiles and drones. So they have definitely gotten some assistance from Iran. But they're just not like they're portrayed to be this Iranian proxy. And they're definitely aligned with Iran and receive support from Iran. But they very much act on their own. So I wouldn't think that Iran is, telling them to do this. I think this is probably their own initiative, and I'm sure Iran is probably, quietly egging them on. They're probably because they are really
definitely rooting them on.
Yeah,
definitely rooting them on. Yeah.
If you like,
Fiorella has joined the show, by the way, so she's here with us. Hey, Fiorella.
Okay.
Dave DeCamp is here, hanging on out. We're talking about nobody messes with the Houthis. Let's bring her on in. How you doing, Fee?
Hi, I'm good. Nice to meet you, Dave.
Yeah, good to meet you. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, you guys don't know each other. We met at the Rage Against the War Machine rally. We're doing it in February again. We're doing Rage Against the Deep State, Defeat the Deep State.
That's
We're going to be doing that one there in the capital. That's going to be fun. We were just talking about Iran's role and the Saudis' role when it comes to the Houthis. Let me just ask a question, and then Fee can piggyback it off it. Dave, Israel has said that the United States needs to get involved when it comes to Yemen. And obviously, in your article, you point out that there's I think you said a 10 nation naval task force. So they're at least fronting that they're getting involved. If the United States doesn't get involved further in this conflict militarily, what's going to be the situation with Israel? What will they do, and how will the world react to that?
Well, the Israel is saying that if the U.S. doesn't take direct action against the Houthis, that they're going to do something. But I'm not sure how much hurt they could really put on the Houthis. It's rare that Israel would launch airstrikes or missile strikes that far. They usually stick to bombing Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. So I think the U.S. is kind of trying to placate Israel right now by forming this task force. But there's definitely some hesitancy for them to bomb the Houthis, to bomb Yemen. And I think it's really the Saudis are telling the U.S. to kind of take it easy, because they're like you keep saying, don't mess with the Houthis. They don't want their oil facilities to start coming under attack again. I think that's the real risk here that both the U.S. and the Saudis are trying to avoid with this whole mess.
Yeah, I would just say I agree. I think it's a very complicated situation in terms of the alliances that we're seeing with Iran, and Lebanon and Syria and Russia. And Russia's in a really interesting position right now, because if this does escalate, while they do have a relationship with Israel, they wouldn't ever take the side of the United States. And I was recently in an event with people where a Russian official basically said that there isn't going to be a Ukraine victory in this conflict. So if we're looking at the geopolitical stage, it's going to happen. We're going to escalate to a World War III scenario, I think. Unfortunately, I have a hard time seeing that we wouldn't, because there's so many fronts where this could happen. It may not happen right away, but what we're seeing is with basically Israel declaring war on Yemen, you're also seeing the U.S. also attempt to declare war on Iran, and you're seeing Lebanon caught in between all of this as well. And I think people need to understand what it means to the resistance of the general axis of resistance that extends far beyond Palestine, far beyond Hamas, far beyond any of that. These people look at this as an existential conflict, as an existential war. If they give in, they will cease to exist, because Israel has been very clear about its motive of expanding, not just into Syria and Lebanon, but into Egypt and into these quote unquote Arab regions, these Middle Eastern regions. So Israel isn't going to stop unless the United States stops. And I did have something about Anthony Blinken saying that Israel still is the victim, which you're still seeing that Israel is being placed as someone that the U.S. needs to protect. So by all accounts, is there really a difference between the United States, State Department, military, industrial complex apparatus, and Israel? Is there really a difference at this point, when we know that Israel is used as a military regiment for the U.S. to achieve its political goals? And that's all it is. I believe this is much bigger than Palestine in terms of what the U.S. now wants to get out. I don't see Israel as more in control. I see actually the State Department and the Pentagon as more in control of the situation.
Oh, I think I lost you guys for a second again, but I'm back now.
Okay.
What's your question? So he could just he can answer that. So
well, where do you see this ending then at that point? In terms of what this conflict will come to?
It's really tough to say. I mean, it's very clear that Israel has, like you said, its eyes on further things than just Gaza right now. Yeah. I think kind of a big thing that they're looking at too, besides Gaza is the West Bank. I mean, in the past, over 2 months now, over 300 Palestinians have been killed there since October 7th. And before that, it was like 200, which was a record high for any year since like the early 2000s. So I think, especially with this Netanyahu government, he has, settlers in his government who are in charge of the West Bank now, who want to they want to conquer the West Bank. And they also have their eyes on Lebanon. I mean, what they're actually saying right now publicly, these Israeli officials, the defense minister has been saying this, is that basically once they finish in Gaza, they're going to move into Lebanon. They're saying they want to push Hezbollah back from the border. And I think, they might do that, try to invade whether or not Hezbollah is on the border. On the other hand, though, the last time they did that in 2006, things did not go very well for Israel. So they definitely need the U.S. support there. And I think it was Axios. I read some report that the U.S. concerned that Israel's trying to provoke a war with Lebanon. And it said that although they were concerned about it, even if they did start this big war in Lebanon, they would still give them military support. Mm-hmm. It's just like the theme that we see. We see these headlines. Oh, Blinken says he's concerned about civilian casualties. They're concerned about this, concerned about that, but they keep giving them, unconditional military support because I think ultimately they are happy with what Israel's doing, despite all the rhetoric that we're seeing. But then there is this, when it comes to just how is this going to progress, there is all this international pressure that is growing, and it's not nothing. I think it's pretty significant. I mean, you see what the Houthis are doing and U.S. allies coming out against Israel. So it's going to be hard, I think, for them to really continue this, but they seem pretty determined to do so.
A lot of people have been questioning when Hezbollah is going to get back, when it's going to get on the offense. Like if they're going to get involved, is Iran going to get involved, right? Does the Houthis making this move right now, getting involved militarily, make it more advantageous for Hezbollah and Iran to say, okay, we can't sit on the sidelines anymore, right? I mean, I understand there was a reason why. Fiorella had an interview with Eva Bartlett that was unfortunately taken down off YouTube where they discussed a little bit of this. But with this move with the Houthis, is it going to make Iran and Hezbollah get a little bit more, okay, now is the time. Let's go. Let's do this, because if we sit back and sit on the sidelines anymore, eventually, like you said, they're going to come hunting for us. Why not be the hunter instead of the hunted? Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, the Houthis are kind of really showing everybody up in the region, when it comes to the resistance factions. I think Hezbollah, it does seem like they do want to avoid like a major invasion or anything like that at this point, but that could change. Because right now, I mean, this Houthi pressure, it's kind of putting more pressure on the global economy. I guess it's putting a lot of pressure on Israel's economy too, you have shipping companies that are coming from Asia, just basically cutting off shipping to Israel, or they have to go around the Cape. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of how long this Houthi. I mean, it doesn't seem like that article that I wrote, the Houthis say they're not backing down no matter how many countries mobilize against them. So I think Iran right now, I can't really see them getting directly involved the way things stand. And then you have the factions in Iraq. Things kind of really escalated there. They were attacking U.S. bases. There's kind of a lull, but now it seems like there's been more attacks and stuff. That's a big thing to keep an eye on, because there's all those Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. And there's been like over 100 attacks on U.S. bases since October 7th in Iraq and Syria. Yep. But they haven't killed any U.S. troops yet, but the U.S. has conducted like 4 or 5 rounds of airstrikes and killed a few dozen of them. So that's definitely another thing. I could see them really stepping things up, because they want to not just punish the U.S. for supporting Israel. They want them out of their country, so that is a big, you talk about existential threats. That's something that, they've been trying to do for a few years now, is kick the U.S. out.
Fam, you got any more questions before Dave gets on out of here?
No. I was just sort of listening to what you guys were saying, and I think we've touched pretty much on everything.
Yeah, I think,
last question I have, Dave, really quick. We saw the Houthis were able to go deep inside of Saudi territory and hit a lot of their oil refineries, and that really scared the crap out of the Saudis, because they don't want them messing with their with their cash crop, right? When it comes to Israel, I think a lot of the things that they need to protect are their desalinization plants, right? That's really important to Israel because you're in the desert and water is life. Do the Houthis have the ability to hit those desalinization plants? And is Israel prepared to deal with that if they do hit those?
I'm not sure about the distance because I know that the Houthis have been able to strike pretty far. I would just have to look at the exact distance, but because I know they struck an airport in Abu Dhabi, which was like their longest range strike. That's pretty far. And I just can't think of exactly how far that it would be to hit Israel there. But yeah, I mean, I know that they've fired some missiles and drones at Israel. I don't know if any have actually really hit anything. But that's definitely something. That's the way they think of how much damage they could do with individual missile strikes. So I'm sure it's things like that are on their mind, or they're kind of trying to form some kind of strategy.
Well, Dave, actually,
Dave,
I
later
do have
on in
one
the show.
last.
Sorry, yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, I just have one last question. Where do you think the American public lies in this whole thing? Where, like, besides protests, which we know during the war in Iraq, millions of people came out to protest. That did very little. I mean, it didn't stop. Where do you think the action that's needed to be taken by the American public falls on them, the burden, and at this point, because we do see a lot of the American people really suffering under the economic decimation, basically, of the United States from what it once was. And I've been living in Moscow, and I've just traveled to the United States, and everything is extremely expensive in terms of food, in terms of so many things. I was at a grocery store yesterday, and I saw eggs for like $8. And I was just flabbergasted that the price of things is so high, but we've been pretty much going towards this direction. How do Americans approach this if they want to, quote unquote, stop what is happening in Gaza and stop the escalations that we're seeing with the Houthis, and not just in the Middle East, but also globally, that the US is pushing?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think right now with what's happening in Gaza, there is significant opposition kind of within the Democratic Party, even within the administration. We've seen dissent from the State Department. Even the Department of Homeland Security wrote a letter, a bunch of staffers there. And so I think, I mean, it might sound kind of like a something that's normally kind of defeating to do, but I think, if you have Democratic representatives or senators, just keep hounding them about it, because apparently they are getting a lot of calls, and you're starting to slowly see more Democrats come out. And I think when it comes to the average American, I mean, we've seen a lot of polls. You never really know with polls, but I think we've seen enough now that show most people want a ceasefire. And I think even if people initially, supported Israel after the October 7th attack, there's enough stuff to see on the internet of just the horrors that are happening in Gaza and all the children that are being killed, that I know personally people that initially had that instinct to be like, yeah, we support Israel's right to defend itself or whatever. But now after, it's just it's just a slaughterhouse in there. And especially after they killed those 3 Israeli hostages. I mean, I think that woke a lot of people up. Again, just thinking of somebody I know personally who's actually Israeli and has family in Israel, kind of everything in there, what they've been saying about this changed since that. It's like, I think that was a big wake up call for a lot of people. It's like, no, they actually are intentionally killing civilians. So political pressure, I guess, is the best way. I mean, do you guys have any better ideas?
Well, I'm just thankful that I got a partner like Fiorella who's really highlighting a lot of this stuff with people like Eva Bartlett and Vanessa Beeley. And, I mean, the great work that the Last American Vagabond's been doing. There's a lot of friends I have that have been highlighting what's really going on over there. But last thing I want to say before you get on out of here, because I know you have to dip, is that you said something earlier in the interview about the fact that if we were to stop supporting them, we being the United States. Later on, we're going to talk about Vivek Ramaswamy, who's getting a skate on every single interview he has. But he's been making this statement. He's like one of the only Republicans. Well, I wouldn't get involved. I didn't like the aid going to Ukraine. I don't like the aid going to Israel. If, in fact, the United States cut off the aid to Israel, that would be the end of this war, correct? That in other words, we are the ones, because a lot of people don't understand this, because I keep on saying, as Israel drops bombs, we are dropping bombs because we're paying for this. So in fact, if he says, oh, I wouldn't give them aid, does that mean that Israel would have to end this war because they wouldn't have the strength to take on the Arab nations, especially the Palestinians, if we cut them off?
I think the U.S. cutting off Israel would make them have to at least really scale things down, because the U.S. they've dropped. I know this was about a month ago or maybe a few weeks ago. The Washington Post reported that Israel dropped 22,000 U.S. provided bombs, and that's pretty sure all of the bombs they're dropping are provided by the U.S., whether through the military aid or through arms sales. So,
there you go.
And they've said, we need this, they need that support to keep this war going. So they would have to at least really scale things back and then ease tensions with Hezbollah, because if they're not going to have the U.S. backing, there's no way they'd be able to support another major war. So yeah, and when it comes to Vivek, he says like all sorts of different things, it seems like, about Israel. But I guess if he's saying let's not give them aid, I guess that's good.
Well, he's just saying that he wouldn't get involved. Then he'd have to,
Yeah.
you'd have to immediately, we're going to get to him later, because then I'm going to immediately ask him, well, so you're going to cut off all aid to Israel together? The problem is he hasn't taken a tough interview yet. He hasn't been pushed on anything.
Yeah.
And that's a shame, because he just skates on everything. From China, he skates on, from Israel to, this great replacement theory he's pushing right now. It's just, yeah. But, fam, you got anything else for Dave? He's got to get out of here. He's got a ton of interviews today. He's a very popular man nowadays.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for
Dave,
having
let
me.
everybody know where they can find you, where they can support your work. Antiwar.com is one of the greatest outlets, and it's especially so important right now, the work you're doing. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find my writing at antiwar.com. I do basically short news articles in the top news section there. I do a daily podcast, YouTube show. It's called Anti-War News, and you can follow me on Twitter, all that stuff. We're actually doing a fundraiser right now at antiwar.com for the end of the year. So if you have the means and can help us out, go to antiwar.com/donate. But yeah, that's everything.
You're a beautiful man. Hopefully I get to see you again in February. Let's go grab a coffee or a drink together. I know you're really busy with all your work, but
yeah.
I
think I'm going to be I think I'm going to be staying. Well, I'm going to try to stay like the whole weekend in DC. I'm not too far from like 3 hours, but I might just get a hotel for the weekend. So yeah, well, hit me up.
Let's go party like this. It's 1999, brother. Let's do it.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Dave DeCamp, everybody, antiwar.com. You have a good one, brother.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.